I like being alone. I've lived alone for most of my life since college. In my free time, I like being alone at home. I'll go out to the soccer field and train alone. I go on hikes alone. I cook alone. Being alone is fine with me. Being alone doesn't make me lonely. They're two different things. I can be in a room full of people and be way lonelier than I am when I'm alone. That's because loneliness is a feeling. It's something inside of me. Being alone is a physical state of being. Now, maybe you like to be alone. Maybe you can't stand it. Maybe you like it sometimes and not others. But no matter how you feel about being alone, no one, not a single person likes to be lonely. Because when we're lonely, we feel isolated. We feel like no one knows us. Loneliness makes us feel left out, silenced, empty. When you're watching a video message like this, loneliness is not having anyone to turn to and whisper, "How long is the youth minister going to keep droning on?" Loneliness depletes our energy. It robs us of meaningful friendship. Loneliness is an enemy of joy. And joy, remember, is being content no matter your circumstances, because you have a source deeper than happiness and pleasure. If you're lonely, you're not happy. That's for sure. Joy and happiness aren't the same thing. Happiness is a feeling usually related to pleasure. Joy, on the other hand, is a choice. It's a deep down satisfaction with who you are and where you are. Joy is great, but it can be disrupted. And one of the things that disrupts it is loneliness. What's more, there's a profound and a pervasive loneliness today. It runs deep. It's everywhere. But most people would deny it. Maybe you feel it. There are so many interactions that used to be face-to-face that aren't anymore. We're meeting over Zoom, we're wearing masks in stores, we're using text and emojis and GIFs to say things that used to be said person to person, face to face. When we start scrolling on our devices, we can't stop. It's an endless stream of the lives that other people are enjoying more than me. The more adventurous, more athletic, more beautiful, more popular lives that others have, and I don't. Neighbors don't talk as much. Kids don't play pickup basketball on the street. There aren't as many barbecue block parties. People aren't going to church as much. Small groups have a harder time getting conversation going because life on a screen is a lot lonelier than we realize. There's a profound loneliness happening, and while it's healthy to put down the devices and look people in the eye, we aren't going to be a device-free world anytime soon. Devices were our lifeline when we were stuck at home during the pandemic. There was a lot that could have caused us to be lonely during that time. Maybe you felt it. I know some of our student leaders did.
Loneliness is a struggle that we all face. Maybe you feel lonely at school or at home or in your faith. We all live so much of our lives through a screen. And especially during the COVID pandemic, we've become isolated. We see these highlight reels on social media and we see just how great someone else's life looks. We see how many friends they have and all the fun things they do, and it can be tough. You feel like you're missing out on so much. You feel jealous, you feel alone. And maybe you feel like your parents don't understand you, or maybe you feel like the whole world is against you. It can be hard when you feel like you have nobody to talk to. Middle school is a huge time of change, and sometimes change can be hard. You're constantly learning new things and meeting new people. You see your friends from before, find new hobbies, go to different schools, branch out to new groups. You may struggle to find your people, and that's okay. A time I felt alone was in 7th grade. I switched schools from NDP to Maryvale, and I only knew a few girls at the school, but none of us were really close. And I felt scared and lonely. Who would I sit with? What would I talk about? My first week of school, I met so many amazing people who made me feel so much better about this huge transition. One of the girls I had met before at Nativity, but I wouldn't really say we were friends. Her name is Lily, and for the last 4 years, we have been best friends. I put myself out there, trusted in God, and quickly felt comfortable at my new school with the help of my new friend. It can be super hard when you find yourself in a new environment, and most likely you will feel alone, but God always has a plan for you. In John chapter 14, verse 18, God tells us, "I will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you." So even when you feel like you're alone, God is always there. And sometimes it feels like you keep on asking God to fix things and nothing changes. But God is constantly working, even when it doesn't feel like it. There are so many things you can do when you feel alone. You could help others, reconnect with an old friend, or try something new. And something that helps me when I feel alone is coming to small group. So this gives me a chance to talk to other people who go through a lot of the same things as me. I know that even if nobody can relate to me, I have people that are willing to listen. And when all else fails, you can always reach back to God. He is your biggest supporter, He loves you more than you know, and He is always there.
We've given you plenty of bad news about loneliness, but here's the good news. Loneliness is temporary. There are ways to fight off loneliness. And here's the biggest one. You are never alone. To understand how loneliness can lead to better things, we're going to look at a moment that was terrible. It was a moment when it seemed like there was no good news at all. It was the moment Jesus was crucified. Here's what it says in John 19. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. There they crucified him, and him with two others, one on either side with Jesus in the middle. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews." Jesus, this man who had thousands of people following him, is all of a sudden totally alone. He's hung on a cross. Being alone doesn't mean that you're lonely, but in this case, everyone deserted him. All his friends and followers left, except for 3 people. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. After this, aware that everything was now finished, in order that the scripture might be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I thirst." There was a vessel filled with common wine, so they put a sponge soaked in wine on a sprig of hyssop and put it up to his mouth. When Jesus had taken the wine, he said, "It is finished." And bowing his head, he handed over his spirit. That's the terrible end to the earthly life of Jesus. He's thirsty, and there's a moment that he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" What could be lonelier than feeling like God has left you? Just moments later, he bows his head and dies. It is finished. But that wasn't the end. Because from that loneliness, Jesus found a way to connect with every person, to never be alone, to never leave us or forsake us. He shared in our suffering. He understood our loneliness. He took our place in our punishment, and then he rose from the dead, told us to not be afraid, and showed us that loneliness cannot steal our joy unless we allow it to. When he was on the cross, Jesus had every reason to be lonely. Yet when Jesus was on the cross, when he could have felt like God had deserted him, when he was in the loneliest of circumstances, I bet Jesus had joy. Now that sounds crazy, I realize, but here's my thinking. He had total confidence he was doing exactly what his Father intended for him to do. So while he could have been lonely on the cross, I don't think he was. Jesus went on the cross so we didn't have to. He also went to the loneliest place he could so that he could come out of the tomb and tell us, you are never alone. He shows us that we can be alone without being lonely. Notice though that even though he was alone on the cross, even though his friends had deserted him, and even though he was wrongly convicted, even though he was in unbearable pain, he still had 3 people there with him. Mary Magdalene, and John. He wasn't totally alone. Neither are you. You're never the only one who is lonely. Let me repeat that. You are never the only one who's lonely. The song Broken by Lovely the Band expresses this perfectly. It says this, I like that you're broken like me. Maybe that makes me a fool. I like that you're lonely like me. I could be lonely with you. Look, I can't take away your loneliness. You will feel it at times in life. We can have times when friends fail us. We can feel like no one gets us. And there's that profound loneliness in our world. But here's my encouragement to you. Don't be lonely alone. Realize there is always someone that you can be lonely with. And when you're lonely together, your loneliness slowly fades away. The opposite of loneliness is connection, real and deep and true connection between people. That's where joy is rediscovered in the face of loneliness. As Jesus hung on the cross, he spoke to Mary and John. He made a connection through his pain. He gave his mother to John to care for, and he said to Mary, "Woman, behold your son." Jesus refused to be lonely alone. And that tiny moment of connection was exactly what he needed to persevere. Tonight, you're going to talk about some ways to fight loneliness and find your joy. But it's as simple as this. Don't be lonely alone. When you feel loneliness creeping into your soul and robbing you of joy, don't let yourself be alone. Don't resort to scrolling. Don't isolate. You can find yourself again by connecting. Find the people who are at the cross with you. Don't be lonely alone.